So go on, that's a deep one. I can be my own worst critic, and also accepting your mistakes and accepting the things that you've gone wrong and learning from them.
Hello and welcome back to Inspire Your Story, the platform where others share their stories to help inspire you. Before we jump in, if I could ask you to hit the subscribe button in order to help me continue to inspire all of you wonderful listeners out there. In this episode, I'll be talking to self-published author Paul Ravenscroft. Hi Paul, and welcome to the channel. To begin with, if you could just introduce yourself, who are you and what do you do?
So I'm Paul Ravenscroft. I'm a full-time civil servant, but on the side I also write novels. I've written a couple already, self-published. That's pretty much me.
Civil service seems like a very interesting job. How did you get into the civil service to begin with?
So back when I was in the midst of time, when I was about 18, I think. I mean, that's so long ago. Yeah, I knew someone that worked in the Ministry of Defence, funny enough, where I'm working now. And at the time, they told me that there was sort of jobs going. I'd just left college, didn't really know what I wanted to do, to be honest. And so they got me some application forms, went up and I had interviews for the Cabinet Office and Treasury, ended up taking a job in the Cabinet Office. And as with many people in the civil service, I've stayed there ever since.
And how does that fit in with your writing? Does it fit in quite well?
Yeah, I think so. I tend to sort of write in bursts, so I can go like for a few weeks, not really do anything. Obviously, if I've had a busy day or busy week at work, I probably won't feel like writing too much at the weekend because a lot of what I do involves writing emails, and so do plenty of writing in the week. So it just depends how I'm feeling, really. It's just a bit of a sort of, I suppose you might call it a hobby, just a weird way of relaxing, maybe. So sometimes on a Saturday morning, Sunday morning, I tend to, for some reason, feel more motivated to write in the mornings. Don't know why that is, but yeah, so maybe I'll spend an hour or two just doing it, and then I can go a few more weeks not really do anything, and then just sort of pick it up when I sort of feel like I've got a bit of a burst of energy or inspiration or whatever it might be.
Would you say that having it as a hobby and not putting loads of pressure on yourself to release books at a certain time helps with the success of the book?
Yeah, well, I suppose I've never really had that choice. I've never really had that option of writing to order. But yeah, I think so. I think I would probably struggle if I was under pressure with deadlines, expectations to write. I think it's nice to be able to just do it as and when I feel like it, do it to the standard that I'm happy with, and keep it as something fairly relaxed. I think some people like doing sort of their work, if it's something that they enjoy doing, then they obviously get sort of inspiration from that and able to work in that way. But I think it's also nice to have a separate hobby and interest that you don't get that pressure with, you don't get that sort of extra sort of expectation.
Going back to when you first started writing, why did you start writing?
I think I've always enjoyed writing ever since I was young. I can't really remember exactly what it was that sort of sparked. I've always wanted to write a book, but I suppose when I was younger, different things, sort of not got in the way as such, but it just wasn't really up there on the agenda. Just something I probably didn't really give too much thought to. And then let's give it a go, see what happens. And I thought, well, it'll either be I'll just write a couple of pages, get bored or lose interest, and so that'll be it, or I'll carry on. And luckily I was able to carry on. It took me quite a while to write my first book, probably about 3 or 4 years, because I'd go like 6 months, as I say, without really doing anything. And then all of a sudden have a bit of a burst, and in the end sort of get it finished. But I think it was something that I just, as I say, I've always wanted to do. Got to a point in my life and I thought, well, why not give it a go now? Otherwise it'll be one of these things you probably look back later on in life and think, why didn't I do that? So.
Did you ever study English?
Yeah, I did English literature at A level. So yeah, I did sort of read a lot when I was younger. Reading's an interest of mine still. Enjoy reading different types of books, fiction, non-fiction. And did sort of study English literature up to a certain point, but I wouldn't say that it really directly influenced me in that respect. I think it was just the kind of writing something I enjoyed, reading other people, how the other people write, other people's stories, I enjoy as well. But yeah, that's probably about as far as it went in terms of inspiration.
For those who are watching this who don't necessarily know what your books are, can you just explain a bit of the blurb as such?
Yeah, okay, so they're pure fiction. They're, I suppose, if you was going to class them in a certain category, they're crime fiction. So they're basically, I've written two, they're the sort of two, what the second follows on from the first, and they're about an East End gangster that sort of rises up through the ranks, sort of becomes the sort of the boss, if you like, and it's just about his story and those around him, and his kind of struggles in his personal life as well as in his, I suppose, for want of a better expression, his business life. So yeah, so that's kind of the story. It's set, the first book set pretty much straight after the Cray twins are imprisoned. This is something I just always wondered, sort of what happened afterwards. You hear obviously there's a lot written about the Cray twins and that their sort of stories up till they went into prison, and then after that there's a kind of, you don't really hear a lot about sort of what happens afterwards, in that area. So it's just something I thought, well, wonder what happened. Obviously there were other criminals, other gangs around, and people that they associated with, and what was the effect of them going inside? Did it make a difference? And as I say, pure fiction, totally made up, but yeah, that's what it is.
You said there's a lot written about the Cray twins after being in prison. Going into your book, did you have to do a lot of research to get the final outcome, or was it literally pure imagination?
So I suppose I was quite lucky that I'd probably done a lot of my research up front because of reading books, not just about the Cray twins, but other sort of crime books, factual books, biographies, that kind of thing about characters and individuals that were involved, not just around the East End, but throughout the UK and even abroad. So I'd read quite a lot of books, also watched a lot of films, which obviously, that's where the kind of fiction element comes into it. So the inspiration was, and the research, if you like, was kind of there. Some of the characters in the books, I wouldn't say they're based on real people, but they have some of the characteristics and personality and ways of people that I'd read about, and sort of amalgamations of those. So yeah, so that was kind of my research. I suppose the only research, or the research that I did as I was writing, was more around the period. So, sort of about the buildings, about the architecture, about the culture, the environment, the way people dress, that kind of thing, social events. I don't mention a great deal of that in the book, but just to sort of, when I'm describing something, just to try and make sure that it was broadly accurate with the time period, really.
And are you writing anything at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm doing the third book. So as I say, written the first two, self-published the first two. I'm about probably 25-30% away into the third book. It's the third part of the series, if you like, the trilogy, if you like. So yeah, so I'm doing that at the moment. Again, it's going in the same way that I seem to write sporadically. I think a couple of weeks ago, I sort of sat down, did a few hours, and then reread it. Thought, yeah, I need to rewrite this completely. So yeah, so it's going. It tends to be a little bit up and down. Especially with the first book, I tended to go back, reread it, edit it, rewrite bits and pieces, and I kind of got into the point where I thought I've got to stop doing this, otherwise I'll never ever self-publish it. I'll just completely keep rewriting it from start to finish.
Would you say you're quite critical on yourself when you are reading back?
Oh, definitely, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite fortunate that I've got quite good reviews on Amazon as the platform where it's published. obviously some of those are from family and friends, so they're going to be quite favourable naturally. But in terms of criticism, yeah, I'm my own worst critic, not just in terms of what I write, but just generally across the board. I think most people are. I think if you're honest with yourself, then you can see where you're you need to improve on things maybe or whatever. But yeah, I would say that if it was just left to me, I'd just be in a continual cycle of rewriting it and going back. And every time I reread it, I'll find something that I'm not quite happy with and I want to change. So in the end, like I say, with the first book and the second, not so much with the second, it got to a point when I just thought, right, yeah, okay, I know I'm happy up to a point with it. I'll publish it, and yeah. Otherwise, as I say, that I'd still be writing the first one now.
How do you break out of that circle?
It's a difficult one, really. I think it came to a point when I thought, if as I say, if I don't just publish it now, then I'm changing things for the sake of changing it. I think in the early rewrites, yeah, when I read them back, I just thought, yeah, there was bits there that didn't make sense to me, or just didn't read very well, or whatever it might be. And in the end, it got to a point where I was changing the text just purely based on probably the mood I was in on the day, really. And I don't know if it was really adding anything, and may have even made it, sort of worse than what was there in the first place. So got to a point when I just sort of said to myself, no, look, that's it. I need to just draw a line, stop it, publish it, and if people then read it and think, God, that makes sense, that doesn't make sense, or yeah, that's not written very well, then, well, I've had plenty of goes at it, so I've got no excuse.
For someone who's watching this who might also be stuck in that circle, what would you recommend to them to get your mind to say, right, enough's enough, stop being too hard on yourself?
I think there's probably two things. Is have a break from it, stop writing, stop looking at it, get somebody else to read it as well. Because, as you say, for all I said about your own worst critic, sometimes other people can pick things up and see things that you just go word blind to in the end. I mean, the exact thing happened with my first book. The first person I got to read it was my wife. And right at the very end, I'd mentioned something, made a reference to something that hadn't actually happened yet, and then happened or was happening right at the very end of the book. And she pointed that out to me and said that how could they know about that? It hasn't happened. And that's something that where I just rewritten, it just completely, it went right under the radar for me. So get somebody else who you trust their opinion, who you trust them to be honest, who's not just going to go, yeah, this is wonderful, just to sort of stay on your right side. And believe me, my wife, if there was anything wrong with it, she would point it out. There's no question about that. And that's a good thing. I think you need that critical eye on it, somebody else's opinion, so that you can kind of get to be happy with this, but it's reached a point where it's good enough, or I'll go with it. And I think when you publish, you can always republish. So if you then come back to it 6 months later, and if people are putting comments online and they don't like certain areas, you can always go back and change it and republish it. So I suppose that's the beauty of self-publishing.
How about in normal life? You also said that in general you're your own self-critic. So how do you break out of that circle away from the publishing side?
Yeah, so God, that's a deep one. I don't know if I'm probably the best person to give other people advice on that, given that, as I say, I can be my own worst critic, and I can probably be more critical of myself and maybe more negative about things than other people looking at what I do from the outside, and sort of what I write, how I work, whatever it might be. So I don't know. I think you just sort of sometimes you just learn more confidence over the years. I think that certainly there's things now that I'm kind of more comfortable with that I never used to be. I used to be more analytical about myself and what I did and that. And I don't know really. I don't know if there's any sort of techniques that you can use. I think it is just building up that confidence and also accepting your mistakes and accepting the things that you've gone wrong and learning from them, rather than continually just thinking back and sort of worrying about them, and just think, yeah, okay, I didn't get that right. What was it about that I didn't get right? listen to criticism and then, you know, kind of filter it as either, yeah, that's constructive criticism, that's something I can learn from, or that is just somebody, you know, having a go, being difficult, whatever it might be. Brush that aside, take the good criticism, take the constructive criticism, use it, and sort of keep developing, you know, in that way. That's probably about as much as I can offer, really.
Life is about having one big lesson. So I completely agree with what you're saying there about learning from your mistakes. Where do you get your inspiration from for the storyline? Is it all from simply sitting down and just going, oh, that would work well? Or do you sit and plan? How do you do it?
So I think in terms of inspiration for the storyline, I get that from various different sources. I get it from other authors that I've read, how they write, what they write about, trying to think about the way that maybe what's inspired them to write about certain things. There's an author called David Peace who writes, well, I suppose they are fiction books, but they are based on kind of real events, real situations. He wrote one that was set in the midst of the miners' strike, and it was about sort of the individuals on various sort of sides, if you like, and that inspired me, that book, to sort of to think about, well, how would the people involved in kind of things that were in real events actually be thinking? And so even though mine is a work of fiction, it's tried to be set in a kind of, you know, real time frame with real events going on in the background. And it's just about how those individuals, those fictional characters, how they thought, how they reacted to things. So it's that, it's watching films, even listening to music. And I'll just sort of sit and get some ideas at various times, and then just try and remember those ideas, jot them down if I can, if it's possible to do that. In terms of sitting down and planning, I wouldn't say I'll do a great deal of that. When I sit down to write, I'll obviously have an idea of what I want to write about, you know, that particular chapter or whatever, and I'll jot things down. The one thing I do plan is the character development. So when I'm looking at who the main characters and secondary characters are going to be, is just fleshing out their personalities, the way they look, the way they dress, what they think about things, their personality in terms of how they react to situations. And I don't always use all of it, but it's good to kind of have that in mind when I'm putting them into a situation of that they would react very differently from another character. To culture, just generally culture, watching films, reading other books, that kind of thing, and then just being influenced, trying to be influenced by that in a good way, and trying to sort of take what I think are the best points of it. How I sort of started on my first book originally was that there's a film called The Longer Friday. It's one of my favourite films. It's a gangster film set in the sort of around about 1980, and originally it was going to be a work of sort of, I suppose, fan fiction, a kind of looking back at 10 years before and how the main character in that film sort of came to power. I wrote to the people that own the rights to the film, and they told me that I couldn't use any of the names or anything like that. So that kind of stopped that idea, but it didn't stop me from going ahead and writing a book. It just had to be purely fictional. So I used some inspiration from those characters and from that film. Yeah, that's kind of what the genesis of it was.
Do you ever get inspiration from your life?
Probably not, in terms of the sort of subject matter that I write about, because I'm about as far from that kind of world as you could possibly get. I don't know, really. I think some of the areas I suppose I have, where I grew up and kind of sort of around the docks in Tilbury, where I lived. Obviously, certain things happened, and as I've grown up, reading about things that happened, you know, not to people I knew, but to people sort of in the areas that I lived. I suppose it does, consciously or otherwise, shape, you know, the way that you think about things and what you write about. I think in one of the books, I set some of the storyline around sort of the Docklands area, East London. Well, mainly it's around East London, Stepney and things like that. And that's where my parents are from, Stepney and Bow, that sort of area. So I suppose it does seep into it, and it's kind of not writing about what you know, but what you're familiar with, maybe. You know, if I'd have set the book, I don't know, up in Scotland or something, it just probably wouldn't have interested me as much. It wouldn't have maybe read as well, because it's just not you know, a geographical area and a lifestyle I really was familiar with. Whereas I think growing up in Essex and coming, you know, from sort of East London, Essex borders, it's just writing about what you're comfortable with and what you're more familiar with. So yeah, I suppose talk myself around now, and I probably do take some influence from my life.
Can we expect to see any more new characters in your new book?
Yeah, there's definitely some new characters. So it's set about 20 years later, 20 years after the events of the second book. So there's still a central hub of some characters that have moved through, but there's some different characters coming in because it's different times, different lifestyle, different people they're dealing with now. So yeah, definitely some new characters. Some of them might last longer than others in the book, should we say? Yeah, again, just sort of a mixture of things I've read about, people I've seen, you know, sort of not in real life maybe as such, but just on the television or films, whatever, taking little bits and pieces from them. Also, probably from sort of news reports as well. It's probably something that I've not really talked about, but you know, sort of looking back and back in the mid-80s, the mid-90s, there was the drug killings in Essex, and the sort of characters, and it was how that was all reported at the time as well, I think, that influenced me, that the glamorization by the press of sort of some of these characters and that lifestyle, and the reality of it being very, very different, you know, that definitely influences how I'd like to write, is to show the reality of it sometimes, and the kind of almost boring, mundane side of it, without trying to make the book boring, if you see what I mean.
Completely get what you mean. Well, Paul, thank you very much. I do finally have 10 very quick questions.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Go for it.
A character that you think you're like in the book?
Oh, that I'm like in the book. I'd like to think that there isn't one character,
Okay.
but there's elements of me in a number of characters. So there's good parts of me in some characters, and there's probably less good parts of me in other characters, I suppose. You always try and identify, I think, with the lead character to a degree, but the lead character, I suppose, is quite different to me generally. But yeah, I've probably snuck in a few traits of my own. I'm not going to mention who or where, but yeah.
If you could be one character for a day in any book or any film, who would you be?
Oh, blimey, that is a good one. I have to try and think about that one, because most of the characters that I identify, particularly in the sort of gangster films, don't end very well. So I suppose, yeah, I'd like to experience the lifestyle without any of the consequences. So maybe a character from a film like Goodfellas, I don't know if you've ever seen that, or Casino, where it's a very stylized view of that life, but it is based in reality. It is based on kind of, you know, people's real lives. So maybe a character like one of the sort of Scorsese films, just to experience the lifestyle and the kind of highs and lows of it, but hopefully without any of the real consequences that come with it.
Next question, favourite chocolate bar?
Favourite chocolate bar, Dairy Milk.
Good choice. One thing that's holding you back?
One thing holding me back, I suppose, is self-confidence.
Yeah, I think a lot of people watching this can probably say exactly the same. Next question, what was one moment where you felt most motivated?
For any time in my life, is this?
Any time in your life?
I think it was probably when my children were born. It sounds like a strange one, but I think it motivated me because it's about somebody else, you know, someone who I've got to be there for now forever, take care of, look after. So yeah, it kind of motivates you to be better, because you're not just doing it for you, then you're doing it for somebody else.
That's a really lovely one. Next question, one dream that you want to turn into reality?
Dream that I want to turn into reality. I suppose there's the obvious ones about winning the lottery.
Other than that.
Other than that, for me at the moment, the dream that I'd like to turn into reality would be for Southend United to go on a great run and stay in the Football League this season.
Next question. If you didn't know your age, what age would you say you are?
Oh, well, up until probably a few years ago, I would have said I was a lot younger, but I think I'm starting to catch up with myself. So I would probably say early 40s.
Okay. A tip for writers out there.
Tip for writers out there, I would say don't do it if you just want success, because there's so many writers out there and so many fantastic writers out there. It's a saturated market. It's so lucky as to whether people, some people do it, it's pure talent. Some people it's talent and luck. And some people are talented and unlucky. So I would say don't do it for the success, do it for the love of it. If you've got the ideas and the love, then you'll write a great book anyway. And you can self-publish these days. So even if half a dozen people read it, up to me, it's worthwhile doing.
I think that goes with whatever in life, that if you do something you enjoy and something you love, you're probably going to get a better outcome in the long run anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. If you're inspired, then you'll always do a better job than, if you're just doing it because you've got some motivation that it's going to be difficult to achieve.
Next question is a moment where you felt most grateful.
Well, God, so many. It's difficult to think of one that stands out over and above everything else. I think there's just been so many times in my life when I've been grateful. When I got married, as I say, when I had children. I think just every time that someone does something for you and you just know that there is nothing behind it, there's nothing they want from it, they're just doing it purely for you. I think that those are the times when I'm most grateful, is when just somebody does something completely selfless.
Final question. How many more books do you plan to write?
At the moment, I've never looked past the one I'm doing at the moment. So at the moment, it's only one more. That will finish the trilogy for me. And then I suppose it's a question of how much I'm inspired to write after that. If I've got ideas, I do have some other ideas. So I expect I probably will write more. But at the moment, it's just purely focused on just finishing the one in front of me.
That's a good way to be, to just focus on what's in front of you, achieve that, and then go to the next. Well, Paul, definitely. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been great having you on the channel.
No, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Personally, one of the most important parts that I took from this interview is about being a self-critic. As we heard Paul speak about, he is a massive self-critic. However, he's managed to find where that line is. And it just goes to show that if you know where the line is, then you will become a success. If you've enjoyed this interview, please click like, hit subscribe, drop us a comment below. Likewise, if you have someone who inspires you, comment below, let me know who they are, or even drop me a message on social media.